A strange visitor entered our solar system in 2025, and almost immediately it became one of the most closely watched objects in modern astronomy. It was called 3IATLAS. At first, the story seemed straightforward. An automated telescope in Chile detected a faint object moving across the sky. Astronomers calculated its orbit, checked the numbers again, and then checked them again. The result was unmistakable. This object was not gravitationally bound to the Sun. Its trajectory was strongly hyperbolic, meaning it had come from outside our solar system and would eventually leave again. That made 3IATLAS only the third confirmed interstellar object ever identified, following Oumuamua in 2017 and Borisov in 2019. But the more astronomers observed it, the more complicated the picture became. The object looked like a comet. It had a coma of gas and dust. It became active as it approached the Sun. It released material into space. And yet, several details did not fit neatly into the behavior astronomers normally associate with comets. One of the most striking was a structure extending toward the Sun. Normally, when sunlight and solar radiation act on material released from a comet, the visible tail tends to extend away from the Sun. But 3IATLAS developed a prominent sunward feature that persisted over an unusually long period. The Hubble Space Telescope observed the object on July 21, 2025, and the structure was clearly visible. At first glance, something pointing toward the Sun might sound impossible. It isn't. Comets can produce what astronomers call an anti-tail. Sometimes this happens because of viewing geometry. A sheet of dust can temporarily appear to point toward the Sun when Earth and the comet occupy particular positions relative to each other. But those effects are normally temporary. The unusual part of 3IATLAS was how persistent and sharply defined the feature appeared to be. It remained visible before perihelion, changed as the comet became more active, disappeared when the object passed behind the Sun, and then appeared again after the comet emerged. That persistence is what made the feature interesting. And then there was its shape. Researchers studying the object reported that the sunward structure appeared unusually narrow, with an estimated opening angle of only several degrees. That is extremely focused compared with the broad distribution of material normally expected from cometary activity. The question was simple: what mechanism could produce such a narrow and persistent structure? One possibility is that the feature was not a solid beam at all. Instead, it could have been produced by sunlight scattering from ice-rich particles released from the comet. That explanation becomes particularly interesting because 3IATLAS appeared to be unusually rich in volatile materials, especially carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide can become active much farther from the Sun than water ice. So while the comet was still deep in the outer solar system, carbon dioxide could have been driving activity and ejecting icy fragments from the nucleus. Those particles could then scatter sunlight and create the appearance of a bright structure extending sunward. Another proposed explanation involves a swarm of smaller particles surrounding the main nucleus. If a large number of fragments separated from the central body, their combined surface area could become enormous. The swarm would not necessarily behave exactly like the nucleus itself. Small differences in how the particles respond to gravity, radiation pressure, and outgassing could create a complicated structure around the main object. From Earth, that could make the comet appear far stranger than the underlying physics actually is. This is an important distinction. Something can look extraordinary without being artificial. And that distinction becomes especially important whenever 3IATLAS is discussed in connection with the work of Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb. Loeb has publicly examined the object's unusual characteristics and has described a number of them as anomalies. But identifying an anomaly does not mean proving an alien spacecraft. An anomaly simply means that an observation deserves a closer explanation. That is how science is supposed to work. We begin with what we expected to see. Then we compare it with what nature actually showed us. When the two don't match, we investigate the difference. 3IATLAS produced several of those differences. Its trajectory was extraordinary. Its coma was unusual. Its sunward structure attracted attention. Its apparent jet was remarkably narrow. Its brightness changed in ways that required careful interpretation. Its chemical composition was unlike that of most familiar solar system comets. And its isotopic measurements suggested that the object may have formed in an environment very different from the one that produced the comets we know best. One of the most interesting measurements involved non-gravitational acceleration. Astronomers detected a small acceleration that could not be explained by gravity alone. That sounds mysterious until you remember that comets are natural rocket engines. When gas escapes from a comet's surface, it carries momentum with it. The escaping material pushes the nucleus in the opposite direction. This is called non-gravitational acceleration, and it has been observed in ordinary comets before. So the existence of the acceleration itself does not prove anything extraordinary. What matters is its relationship with the object's other behavior. 3IATLAS was simultaneously showing evidence of active outgassing, a complicated coma, and a strong sunward structure. If material was being released preferentially from one part of the nucleus, the resulting recoil could naturally alter the object's trajectory. In that sense, the unusual acceleration may actually support a conventional cometary explanation. There was also an intriguing thermal measurement. Material associated with the jet was reported at a temperature around 140 Kelvin, while a simple equilibrium estimate at the object's solar distance was closer to 180 Kelvin. That difference raised another question. Why was the observed material colder than a straightforward surface heating model would suggest? One possible answer is rapid expansion. When gas moves through a restricted region and expands quickly, it can cool. If the material was escaping through a narrow channel rather than simply evaporating uniformly from a broad surface, that could help explain the lower temperature. Again, this does not establish artificial engineering. It simply gives researchers another physical process to investigate. Then came the question of color. Online discussions often described 3IATLAS as dramatically changing from one color to another. The actual observations are considerably more complicated. Different telescopes use different filters, different detectors, and different calibration procedures. A comet's appearance can also change as its coma evolves and the relative amounts of dust and gas change. Measurements of its spectral slope indicated unusual coloration, but the evidence does not justify the idea of a dramatic permanent transformation. Some apparent changes may have been genuine changes in the surrounding material. Others may have resulted from differences between observing systems. The scientifically responsible conclusion is therefore more restrained. 3IATLAS displayed unusual photometric behavior, but the popular descriptions of a spectacular color transformation went beyond what the data firmly established. Its brightness behavior was more interesting. As it approached the sun, the object brightened rapidly. That is exactly what you would expect from a comet becoming increasingly active, but the rate of brightening was unusually steep. The closer it moved to the sun, the more volatile material became available for sublimation, increasing the amount of gas and dust surrounding the nucleus. Some reported short-term brightness jumps, however, did not survive careful analysis. Several apparent outbursts could be explained by poor observing conditions or contamination from background stars. That is another lesson from 3IATLAS. Not every strange-looking measurement is a new physical phenomenon. Astronomy is full of false alarms. A signal can appear in an image because of the instrument. A brightness spike can come from the atmosphere. A color difference can come from filters. The job of science is not to collect anomalies. It is to determine which anomalies remain after the obvious explanations have been eliminated. And some measurements of 3IATLAS did survive that process. Its chemistry was perhaps the most striking. The object appeared to contain unusually large amounts of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide compared with typical solar system comets. The reported carbon dioxide to water ratio was exceptionally high. The carbon monoxide to water ratio was also unusually large. But the most remarkable result involved deuterium. The deuterium to hydrogen ratio in its water was reported to be dramatically higher than the ratios measured in known solar system comets. That matters because isotope ratios can preserve clues about where and under what conditions an object formed. In other words, 3IATLAS was not simply carrying ice and dust. It was carrying a chemical record of another environment. Some analyses suggested that the object could be billions of years old, potentially originating in a very different period of the Milky Way's history. If those age estimates are correct, 3IATLAS may have formed long before the Sun and planets of our own system existed. That would make it more than an unusual comet. It would be a natural sample from another chapter of galactic history. And then the object made a relatively close pass by Mars. On October 3, 2025, 3IATLAS passed within roughly 0.194 astronomical units of Mars. That gave spacecraft operating around Mars an unusual opportunity. Instead of viewing the interstellar object only from Earth, scientists could observe it from another part of the solar system. The European Space Agency's ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter and other Mars-orbiting assets turned their instruments toward the visitor. NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter also collected observations.